Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline is the play-by-play voice of USF football, Jim Louk. Jim, welcome to BYU Sports Nation.
Thanks, appreciate it.
All right, let's first address some of the American Athletic Conference items that have recently surfaced, and then we'll break down the USF Bulls. UConn's leaving the league. What was your initial reaction to finding out the Huskies were seeking a new football home and that their other programs are headed to the Big East?
You know, it's been whispered for a long time, but I was a little bit surprised at the suddenness of it when it did come out. It makes a lot of sense, obviously, for them for basketball, but to not have a clear-cut situation for football, I mean, it's quite a decision. And then for the American, it's now an 11-team football league starting in 2020, so there's decisions to be made there. Do you try to get a 12th member? Do you stand pat at 11? If you do, then you've got a division of 5 teams and a division of 6 teams, so you're probably breaking down your divisions and then changing there. So it's an interesting scenario, and even though it had been talked about quietly for a long time, when it happened quickly.
Would you like to see the league add another member?
Well, I think the question is, who can you add that brings any value? That's a pretty limited number of programs, and then can you overcome all the other things to make that happen or not? I don't think you want to add a 12th just to have 12, and I think that's where the league is heading in their mindset. I would not be shocked if they stayed at 11. I think it would be great to have 12 teams if you have a 12th team that makes sense. If not, you probably stay where you're going to be at.
Is there a 12th team that makes sense to you personally?
Well, BYU is certainly one of the ones that comes up. If that was possible, Boise State comes up in conversation as well. The challenge you have, obviously geography and television issues. Does it make sense there? Army is getting floated a lot, one that's probably a little bit more geographically sensible. USF was in Conference USA with Army for a few years, and it didn't really work out for Army, and they ultimately left. What do you do with the Army-Navy game in that scenario? So there's no clear-cut, easy, clean answer. There's programs that are intriguing and make sense, but to me, personally, it feels like an uphill climb no matter where you're going.
We're talking with the voice of the USF Bulls, Jim Louk, on BYU Sports Nation. Yesterday, we spoke with Brett McMurphy of Stadium Sports and brought up the idea of football only because BYU does have a nice home in the West Coast Conference for their Olympic sports, and the Olympic sports geography is a big deal. But the independent football team, if they were to go football only in the American Athletic Conference, would that strike your fancy?
I think that's the only sensible scenario, really, and it has worked in the American for Navy. I would think that Navy fans would tell you that that's been a pretty good fit for the last couple of years. It's certainly been beneficial to the American to have Navy in as a football-only member. Again, when you get into that kind of geographical concern and going all the way across the country, right now the American, as everybody knows, doesn't stretch any further west than Texas and Oklahoma. So that's a reach for all of your sports programs. Football only, becomes a little bit more workable, I would think.
All right, let's break down the USF Bulls. BYU headed to Tampa to take on the Bulls. It was an interesting season, I imagine, last year, winning the first 7 and losing the next 6. How did you and everybody feel about last season?
Felt real good at 7-0. Didn't feel quite as good at 7-6. It's interesting though when even when the team was 7-0, there was cautious concern because the 7 wins included some really dramatic last-minute come-from-behind wins against teams that they probably should have handled in much more convincing fashion. They definitely had some flaws last year. That said, going from 7-0 to 7-6, and dropping the bowl game that they played in was a tough way to end the season. You know, they technically entered this year starting their first game against Wisconsin on a 6-game losing streak, which is unusual for this program. They have revamped the offense this year, and I think that's what the USF fans are really excited about. Kerwin Bell is the new offensive coordinator. He had been the head coach at Valdosta State, won a national championship there in the Division II level, and he's got some very inventive ideas for getting USF's playmakers in space. And team speed has always been such a big part of USF football that getting guys isolated and running some inventive stuff has kind of got the fan base excited. So we're looking forward to seeing exactly what that looks like this year.
BYU headed to Tampa to take on the USF Bulls on October 12th. We're talking with Jim Louk, the voice of the USF Bulls. What's the impression of BYU all the way down there in Tampa?
You know, the Bulls have always tried to schedule aggressively non-conference, and the fan base always responds to that. So I think they're really looking forward to it. Obviously, it's a national brand. It's a team that everybody's heard of, everybody knows. But at the same time, I don't know that many USF fans could go in depth on BYU's current style of play or some of the personnel or anything. I think they're just intrigued by seeing a team that doesn't come to this part of the country all that frequently, and, you know, is a team that has had consistent success over the years. So they're looking forward to it. They're kind of excited about it.
Speaking of intrigued, I'm intrigued by Johnny Ford, who is a running back who put up 787 yards, 8 touchdowns, 6.8 yards carry. He's 5'5", and now he's playing in the slot. What kind of usage do you see for Johnny Ford this season?
They just want to get him the ball a little bit more. He's, you know, the best thing you can say about him, he's elusive, he's got speed, and I'm not being facetious because he's 5'5", but the bottom line is people just don't see him. They can't find him. And once he gets a little bit of a gap, he can really run up some yards on you. The move to the slot is intriguing because under the offensive playmaking in the last couple of years, running backs very, very rarely caught passes in the USF offense. That's going to be a big change this year, using guys out of the slot a little more, but also throwing to running backs. And I think Ford will get his fair amount of carries as well. But the whole idea is to try to get him downfield with the football, and they think they can do that more effectively running him out of the slot.
Charlie Strong has a senior quarterback returning in Blake Barnett. What's a realistic expectation for Blake in his final season as a member of the Bulls?
I think he's really going to benefit from this new offense. He's a talented kid. He's a good teammate. He is, you know, at 6'5", he has that classic quarterback build. But we were surprised last year in his first year with USF at how mobile he was. He really ran the ball pretty well. The drawback on that was that he got pretty badly dinged up toward the end of the season, primarily from running the football. So I'm not sure they're going to call on him to do that quite as much this year. But when he was healthy last year, he was very consistent, quick delivery, gets the ball out. He can have a very good senior season. They've just got to keep him healthy, and he's got to make the proper adjustments to a much different offense. But he's a real student of the game, so I think he'll be successful in that.
Jim, BYU feels like altitude can be an advantage at home for BYU. For Tampa weather, which the average is a high of 85, some humidity. October 12th when they play. Is that an advantage perhaps for USF at home against BYU at that time of year?
It could be, certainly. It's the summer's not going to let up very much by October 12th. Unless something really unusual happens, it's still going to be warm and it's still going to be humid. And of course, the Bulls, you know, train in that in really the incredible heat and humidity of summer. They do all their training outdoors. They do not have an indoor practice facility at this time, so they're very acclimated to that. And I'm sure it is an advantage. You know, we see some teams, particularly from the Northeast, come down and kind of wilt by the end of the game. So it's something the Bulls use in their favor. It helps as they move quickly offensively to try to keep the defense on their heels. It can wear you down, no doubt about it.
Jim, we're always open to hearing about food recommendations when we're traveling to your part of the country. So in Tampa, Florida, where should we eat when we come down for the game?
I'm going to recommend the Ybor City section of Tampa, which has a host of great restaurants, but probably the one that stands out in my mind is the Columbia. So if you want a nice sit-down dinner, not too elegant, but certainly great atmosphere, that would probably be the one in Ybor City, actually not too far away from Raymond James Stadium.
Fantastic stuff. Jim, we appreciate you joining our show. Great to talk with you, and we'll see you in October.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.